Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're looking at the EU under pressure, a bit of the blowback against globalization, if you will, this time being felt in the Wallonia region of Belgium, and that is holding up a free trade agreement with Canada, which was to have been finalized this week ahead of an EU summit that opens Thursday in Brussels. With us to talk about it, John Evans, Secretary General of the Trade Union Advisory Committee to the OECD, German entrepreneur Jakob Hessler, from Hania on the Greek island of Crete, economist Yanis Koutsamidis, and the former Canadian ambassador to the EU, Jeremy Kinsman. Yanis Koutsamidis, I want to bring up with you something that Jeremy Kinsman brought up in part one of our discussion, and that is Wallonia, this one region inside of one country among 28, there's still 28, who is able to hold up the agreement. What are your thoughts on that? Should consensus politics be rewritten when it comes to Europe?
Well, this is a new attempt for Europe to become more democratic, to have the national parliaments and the regions involved. There are another two regions beside Wallonia which have to ratify the agreement. I think it's a positive step. We have to take care of the anxieties of the European citizens that have been feeling that there are decisions taken out of their hands in some bureaucratic system in Brussels. I think it's a good procedure, but we have to grow up from these procedures. The national parliaments and the national governments need to realize that we need desperately to have growth, and growth can come from trade, new partnerships around the world, because the rest of the world is not waiting for Europe to make deals. They're dealing all around the world. They're growing. China is growing 6.7%. India is growing more than 7%. We have a stagnation of growth in Europe, and we need to do all that we can to enhance the growth and the economy in Europe. So this is a trade agreement that will bring jobs and will bring opportunities to young entrepreneurs to make new partnerships with Canadian companies, to go to North America, to open up business. I think it's a positive step, but I think there will be losers from this. We have to take care of the losers, like we have seen in Great Britain, that the losers of the globalization have turned around the country in one single vote. So there has to be a real discussion of who's losing from this agreement. Is it small business owners? Is it the pensioners? Is it the workers? I don't think the workers have anything to fear. New jobs will bring new opportunities. Right. The pensioners have every reason to believe in growth in Europe, because it will support the social system. The small entrepreneurs have the problem, and the small business owners, and the national governments need to help the small owners cope with the big competition that will come with this agreement.
All right, let me turn now to Socialist Senator Olga Zrian, Vice President of Wallonia's Regional Senate. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate. I know you were kept by a vote just a few minutes ago, so you may have missed part of our conversation. But let me just ask you, you just heard Yanis Koutsamidis say this is not going to hurt workers. Your region, high unemployment, industry is hurting. It's one of those places where there's a lot of blowback against globalization. Do you hear Yanis's arguments? Is the CETA deal a good one?
Yes, because more to this, you have to add farmers, as we have a special type of farming industry, which is more a family way and oriented to short system for food. And of course, if we have to compete with the big farms of Canada, it will be for us a real problem. More to this, we have in the treaty a special point on the protection of the farming in Canada, which we don't have in Europe. So we are just wondering, why is this clause not a bilateral one? Among to this, you have to add all the way the disputes can be settled. We have been used in Europe to use the legal and national systems to settle all our disputes. Here we are going to adopt a system which is an international court system, which is first very far from the people, And the second point, it is a very expensive one, as it has been proved in other treaties. And if we had to give a last point, it is the system of what we call regulatory cooperation, which is the way all our standards, which are so important for us, it is really what we call the heart of the consumers policy, which we have been developing in Europe, is going to be put at stake by the fact that all the standards, as far as social, environmental, and even the labor standards, could be discussed in other places before being proposed or even suggested to the states. So we have the feeling that the first priority is how to make the best investments, how to make the best trade systems, and not really taking care of the reality of our economic system today.
And Olga, let me ask you, the leader of your party, this is the former Prime Minister of Belgium, Elio Di Rupo, under pressure. Do you think he's going to change his stance and that he could, in the end, agree to all of this?
Well, what I've just said, has something changed? No, not really not. We've asked to have added comments and added laws and rules to this treaty. The answer is we cannot change the treaty. The only thing we have got was an interpretative notice. As it is said, it is a notice. It has no binding commitment in the whole of the treaty, which is totally unacceptable for us. I think having been negotiating for 8 years, 2 years of discussions in our parliament, and now everything should be just set up in 8 days, even 3 days, even 1 week. Where are we going to do with this?
All right, let me bring in the former Canadian ambassador to the EU, Jeremy Kinsman. I don't want to go over all the points we discussed in part one, but specifically, what would you answer on the issue of farming? I know livestock farmers in Europe are particularly worried.
I don't know. I think that we're going to have to accept that we're just living on two different mental planets here. Canada has been, I think, quite outrageously protectionist in some of its agricultural instruments for protecting our dairy farmers, our chicken producers. And as a matter of fact, what this treaty does is break that down. And politically, it's very, very hard for elected Canadian politicians to go to specific regions, as the senator is talking about her specific little region in Europe, to convince them that there are...
Her little region, by the way, has 3 million citizens. It's not so little.
Well, no, but it's 3 million citizens out of 520 million, right? I know it very well. I have a lot of sympathy for it. But Wallonia has been on the losing end of economic trends for about 80 years. I don't think this has anything to do with Canada. I think it has to do with resentments within Belgium about who is, on top these days and who is hurting the most. We all have tremendous concern about the anxiety, that is being caused to people as a result. Excuse me.
Much too easy to use this kind of arguments. I think it's not fair.
I don't know if it's easy. I don't know if it's easy. It happens to be true.
All right, let me begin. John Evans, very, very briefly.
Can I speak up for Wallonia? Because, I mean, many of the same concerns, not specifically on agriculture, but about the question of investment tribunals, the regulatory environment and the ability to make good environment regulations, were all the points which were put forward not just by trade unions, but also by the consumers' associations in Europe and also by the environmental associations. Now, so it's not just Wallonia who's got it wrong. There's a lot of parts of Europe which are deeply concerned about certain elements of the treaty. Now, that has to get right.
Are you concerned, Mr. Evans?
And the arguments, this is a precedent for the future about precisely companies being able to, whether American, Canadian, elsewhere, to actually challenge national governments on questions of regulation. I'd say more broadly, the issue about trying to get trade negotiations back on track, governments need to actually create jobs by getting rid of austerity, by trying to invest in infrastructure, by trying to raise wages. I think there's certain studies have been done which suggest that agreements like CETA and TTIP put a dampener on wages by actually tilting the power more to companies rather than workers in international environment. I think that has to get fixed if we're to move into a situation where people have confidence in the trade system again in the future. And by the way, it wasn't a minority in the UK who voted against Brexit for Brexit. It was actually the majority, unfortunately, who seem to think they are losers in this process. So we've got to get those issues right in the future and actually create good jobs.
But I think there's an important point, I think, though, which is we are now holding a trade and service agreement responsible for the failure of European states for 30 years to create sustainable growth and to deregulate and to work better in the economies. And I feel there's a blaming going on, and it's concentrated on that thing because you hit what you can now get. So I think, let's not fool ourselves. There has been the closing of a Caterpillar factory in Charleroi, has been last week. So how can you, in the wake of that, not just say, oops, what's happening here? The problem is, in my view, is the fundamental inequality that societies have produced. But that inequality is not due to trade or it's not due to globalization. It's due to the fact that our economies on the inside don't work properly, and I find
part of it is due to globalization.
It's the same blaming, shaming, which is the EU with its bureaucratic measures is the problem, etc. I personally think the treaty is not so bad. What I do think, though, is the way it was negotiated, the way these things are being negotiated is in a way that today citizens want more transparency, and I think we're cut in a movement where going forward we will not negotiate these in the same way. Now that will put limits on what we can negotiate. The only option B, and that's where I think I do not concur with the Greek colleague, I do not think the fact that national parliaments claw back sovereignty or even regional parliaments from the European Union is per se a good thing. If the European Union had a properly democratic functioning with a proper parliament that could ratify a treaty, there would be no need, because you would say it's a proper representation of the European people, and by majority vote, they can decide what they want.
So Jakob Hessler making the argument that more Europe, not less, is what's needed. Olga Zirin.
Yes, that's exactly what we say. What we just examined is that we have a treaty of a new type with new clauses. And what we say that if the things have been done quite properly with a lot of transparency, and if the different population would have been put into work on these things very clearly, I think things would have been totally different. But as we can admit today that what has been suggested in this treaty is a new pattern of negotiations, is a new pattern of treaty, we just want to give a new type. And we say this thing about the ICS is not a good idea how to work in Europe and with all our partners, of course, including Canada, with whom we have so good trade relationship. Of course, having this code of regulatory processes is not good, because what we want is to get the better standards. What we want to have is something which is not social dumping. So what do we say simply? Please, let's take the time. Having been negotiating for nearly 10 years, how is it we can take 6 months more to be sure that everybody, even Germany, who is suspended to the decision of the Constitutional Court, could agree on what is proposed? How is it that other countries each time have to add special protocols added to something which is not really binding? Greece with CETA and other things like that.
Right, let me just ask Yanis Koutsoumidis about this and about a claim made by John Evans. Is it true that generally free trade agreements dampen growth, or do they add growth as a general rule?
If we just have a look at what NAFTA has done, the result is very
Yanis
bad.
Koutsoumidis.
Yes, well, to give you an example, we have regions in Greece where unemployment is more than 30%. A trade agreement would give huge opportunities to Canadian companies and come and invest, and also Greek companies to be able to attract Canadian capital. This is a new future for people that can't afford to have a living right now. So we don't have a luxury of saying, well, we don't like this paragraph, or the other paragraph could have been a bit better, when we have people who can't live on normal circumstances right now in Europe. Europe needs investments, and it's urgent. We have to understand the urgency of some regions of Europe.
John Evans?
First of
May I
all,
make
as
a
I said at
point?
the very beginning, certainly the organisations I represent are very much in favour of trade. The question is an agreement which gives these sorts of rights to companies and potentially limits good government regulation and potentially opens up parts of the public sector to private sector investors and subsequently to claims in courts. Is that the right sort of agreement we need now? We're essentially trying to get a process forward where trade actually contributes to Europe in the future.
Jeremy
At the
Kinsman.
same time, it
Jeremy
distributes
Kinsman.
benefits better.
I just find that people, this is 2016, okay? It's not 1816. And this is an agreement that is attempting to deal with the intricacies and complexities of the international modern economy today. We in Canada, just as you in Europe, have every preoccupation with absolutely ensuring that people have a voice. Our regulatory system, we would not weaken it for the sake of this treaty, and we don't expect anybody else's regulations to be weakened. There is no specific entitlement here to corporations to weaken anybody's national regulations or standards in health, environment, or labor.
If this,
that isn't in
if
the
this
treaty.
was an agreement
The only
about
issue-
raising
the only
standards
issue-
and
The
regulations,
only issue is if a government, a new government is elected and wishes to change the regulations that affect a prior investment by whoever, then that person, that corporation, that entity is entitled to some form of arbitration.
as they would be, that entity now would be able to use
normal.
national courts to take
Nor is
their
nor
case in
is
national
there
courts.
anything
No,
here
but, I think we
about
should
a
split.
disposition to transfer from the public to the private sector any domain of business or other
But
activity.
we should split. I
This
think we
is
should
just
split. But I think we
mythology.
should split the legal question of how a private sector company would seek compensation. For example, in case, imagine there's a government A, it privatizes hospitals because it's a government that believes in privatizing hospitals. Now, investors invest in these hospitals. The next government comes 4 years later and says, actually, we do not believe in private hospitals. We will renationalize them. Any law existing in any country I know would say the private investor who invested in good faith in these hospitals, when they're being renationalized, has a right to be compensated for his losses. That is completely standard procedure within each and every country. Every country is democratically free to privatize, renationalize, reprivatize how it sees fit. The difference is how do you seek compensation? And the International Arbitration Tribunal, what it does, it says, if you seek compensation from the government, you are in Canada, imagine, and it's a European government that has renationalized the hospital you were just buying, you can seek compensation from an independent panel that's neither French nor Canadian, or neither European nor Canadian, but that is independent under the auspices of some type of a World Bank logic. That's what the issue is. That is per se neither good nor bad, but we have to discuss that and how much of this we want and how much, if we don't want that, we are ready to invest in an international court system, because we cannot. I think it is necessary to have some type of supranational system to deal with these disputes. And either you create a national UN type international court of commercial justice for investment cases, or you say you have a more flexible system, which is what's proposed now.
At the
All right,
moment,
let me put this to Olga's Rian, because right now the mood around Europe is not for handing more powers to Europe. What's your prediction going forward? Are we headed for more and more gridlock and the chance of striking a deal in the future becoming smaller and smaller? Olga's Rian?
Sorry, I didn't get you.
The question was, right now we're seeing that the mood is against giving more powers to the supranational level, Europe-wide. So is it now or never if you want to strike these kinds of deals?
No, it's not now or never. It's just let's take the time, make a real transparent procedure, Let the things really be in contact with the real society and not decide anything top down from the Commission. That's what we say.
Real society. The real society. None of these elites, I guess we mean, right? The real society.
The
farmers,
farmers
we spent 5 years consulting with every possible interest group involved. There could not be more transparency. This is a complete myth.
Of course. How is it that in 8 days we got more than you got in 8 years? How is it that we can change?
We're unfortunately out of time, so we're gonna have to leave it there for now. I want to thank you, Olga Zrian, for joining us from La Louvière in Belgium. I want to thank as well the former Canadian ambassador to the EU, Jerry Kinsman in Victoria, Canada, Yanis Koutsoumidis in Hania. I want to thank as well John Evans and Jakob Hessler. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to James Creedon after a spirited discussion. Many, and we were saying it at the outset, we heard John Evans say how this deal is a blueprint for those to come. And when we say those to come, the first thing many think of is that deal with the United States, TTIP.
That's right, and TTIP has been rejected now by the French, German and Austrian governments. European countries were essentially supporting the deals such as TTIP for a long time, but I think popular pressure meant that there was a switch at the end. People power is ending TTIP and other unpopular EU free trade deals, says The Guardian. And even if TTIP has now been sort of put to one side, if you like, a lot of people are essentially saying CETA, this free trade deal between Europe and Canada, is TTIP through the back door. A lot of headlines sort of linking the two, if you like, the Canadian trade deal, which will let in TTIP by the back door. Now, what do people mean by that? This article in politics.co.uk is giving a couple of details. It champions the destruction of rules designed to protect society and the environment. There are huge differences in food safety rules between the EU and Canada, and this deal such as this would mean we were going for the lowest common denominator. In other words, less protection for environmental norms or health norms, rather, in Europe. Also, worryingly, for those who oppose CETA, it includes a cosmetically rebranded version of the corporate court system, which was so controversial in TTIP, which essentially would create a one-way justice system for big business to sue states for lost profits. So these are the points that a lot of people say are just simply not really acceptable. Just to show you a couple of more headlines in that regard, François, CETA is not the progressive agreement it claims to be. That's on Euractiv.com. Meanwhile, on social media, you've got many supporting, in fact, Wallonia. Millions in Europe count on you, Paul Magnette. Stay firm and hashtag stop CETA. You're having the far right in France making similar calls. This is Florian Philippot, the deputy leader of the National Front Party, who is opposing CETA and EU totalitarianism. Of course, that's very much in line with National Front anti-EU an anti-EU stance. But then, this is what's so confusing about it, on the political left, the Ecologie Debout movement, how would you say that? Ecology Standing Up. They are supporting Walloons as well in their stand against CETA. Others pointing out that countries such as Bulgaria and Romania also have strong reservations against CETA. It's not just the Belgian region of Wallonia.
In the discussion, Jeremy Kinsman saying that in Canada, many politicians are spending political capital to get this through.
Indeed. Just one, I mean, I'm focusing here more on the European aspect of it, but just one article in counterpunch.org critical of Justin Trudeau for his stance on this. Despite its sunny ways, the Trudeau government appears to have resorted to bullying and spin to try to get its way on a controversial trade deal. The target is the Belgian region of Wallonia, says this article. And so essentially they're talking about Trudeau being sunny on the outside, but actually having tactics that amount to bullying. Now, obviously, I've only shown you the CETA opposition content, but social media, if you type in CETA into Twitter or any of these search or social media networks, it's largely stacked against trade deals such as this.
Just one word. Do you think that Justin Trudeau is able to bully Brussels?
I don't think it's going to be bullied. I am rather relaxed. I think it will go through. It will take more time. Few things. It may be reopened, although they say it won't. But it's negotiation of a new style, of a new kind. It's the new reality. We have to accept it. And I'm not that skeptical.
All right. Something we'll definitely be revisiting.
Yeah.
I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you, James.
Thanks, François.
Thanks for joining us here in the France 24 debate.